All right, well, welcome to this session, which we'll be talking about HR, conflict resolution, and sort of the people end of community media. My name is Haines, and I'm the Volunteer and Outreach Coordinator for KBOO Community Radio here in Portland.
I'm Liz Rhodes. I'm actually a board member of Open Signal, and I am the Professional Growth and Development Lead at ZGF Architects.
And so we have a somewhat different focus. I have no official HR background, but have 17 years of experience as a volunteer coordinator in an extremely diverse community media outlet in helping people get along and stay respectful to each other.
And I work in a very team-driven place. It's a creative service industry. So we have a lot of different types of architects. We have a lot of different types of individuals who work for us in different departments, from the business department to admin to marketing staff, and then we have our designers. And we focus really on collaboration and iteration. So through that sometimes comes difference of opinions, and that usually for us is that creative difference of opinions is a lot of times where because people are very passionate about it, that's where a lot of our conflicts come in. So a lot of times my role on a daily basis is to mitigate those very small interpersonal relationships on teams and trying to continue to drive the project forward. And that's just sort of the day-to-day basis of what I do. And then unfortunately there are what I take outside of that box and call the true HR functions. When things are escalated, managers themselves and individual staff are no longer to have conversations, and then they come to me, and sometimes they get in the legal realm too. So a lot of times I prefer, of course, to stick into that dynamic where you're keeping your teams together and you're actually growing someone through feedback and teaching them how to give feedback too.
So we thought we would structure this by both giving a fairly short presentation about what we know and wanting to be much more interactive with you, because this is such a broad topic. And there's so much that we could cover that would be sort of on the hypothetical, but maybe less useful to you. So how many people, when you hear, oh, there's a conflict here, how many people are like dreading that? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to how many people hear, there's a conflict here, and you think, cool, we can learn something. Right on.
Nice.
And I like the honesty of sorta, you know, because that's probably where I'm at. For me, conflict does mean that there is an opportunity for growth if we deal with it in a healthy fashion. When we don't deal with it in a healthy fashion, it means that it's going to be an energy-sucking vortex that has the ability to really detract from the very important work of your organizations. And so one of the things that I have found that has helped us the most is to normalize conflict, to try to get people over that hurdle of, oh, this is going to get messy, my feelings are going to get hurt, I'm really upset, I don't want to deal with this at all. Best to ignore it. We'll just push that down. I don't have to really engage that person anymore, I'll just look over here. And you find that that only works for about this long, and suddenly this thing that may have been able to be taken care of in a healthy fashion has now taken on a life of its own. And if it's still unaddressed, it takes on a life of its own in sort of a team sports kind of way, where suddenly your entire organization is factionalizing over it, right? And so this is the environment I certainly was familiar with and wanted to help to shift over time with the organization I work with. We have 500, more or less, it varies somewhere in between 480, 530 people engaged in the organization. And I would say out of those, probably about 350 of them in a very regular capacity, very engaged in a weekly or monthly basis. And by necessity, we are radically inclusive. We are the community's radio station. We are not here for and by any one community. So we have volunteers from the age of 80 to folks who are in their 80s. We have volunteers from many ethnic backgrounds, from many schools of thought, philosophies, political leanings. We have volunteers from across the LGBTQ spectrum. We have volunteers really from just about all walks of life. We have volunteers who are houseless. We have volunteers who are comfortable, retired college professors, college dropouts. And we're all making radio and podcasts in a very small building about 1 mile south of here. And so the rule of the day for us is staying respectful, and actually, if you can get past staying just respectful, to be excited and supportive of each other, building a very strong internal community. And some days, some years, this goes better than others, right? So one of the things that we have learned is that if we're really upfront about our house rules, which is we always treat each other with respect, we never humiliate people, we never humiliate anyone in our community, we always take responsibility to help resolve our conflicts. So somebody can't just say, I don't know, I don't have a problem with them, they have a problem with me, I don't have anything to do with this, I'm out of here. You talk to them about it. That's not okay. That's not healthy. Everyone has to engage in resolution process if there is a conflict. And we expect everyone to treat each other well. We don't have sort of a double standard where, staff can do this, but volunteers have to be compliant, and that doesn't happen. We are all in this together. And the more we emphasize that and the more we try to get up front with that, I have seen things go smoother. We also, in addition to that, really need to address the structural oppressions that are present with us at all times. And so we also have taken a lot of care over the last few years especially to make sure that we're all starting to play off the same page. For many years, my first maybe 12, 15, somewhere in there years of being the volunteer coordinator at our monthly orientations, I would just say, everyone check your isms at the door, right? They don't belong here. Get rid of that. And in my Pollyanna way, would hope that it would work, right? Of course that doesn't work, because we all think that we're good people. In fact, we are all good people. And sometimes we have biases that we have not addressed, that we have not become aware of, that we may not actually be rising to our own expectations of ourselves, but unless somebody points that out, we're not going to know. And so with that in mind, we've started a regular training session that we're now requiring all program producers, content producers, front desk volunteers, news producers to take once a year. And that is basically addressing what systemic oppression is, what bias is, and how one needs to actively participate in breaking down barriers and in building bridges within our organization. That is interesting, and I think it's going well. We've been present with that for about 2 years now, and so it's a little hard for me to say, oh yes, and it's a rave success. But I am seeing the dialogue come up, and I am seeing people actually engaging on these levels. We're also holding a discussion group where we are able to talk about these issues on the first Saturday of every month, again encouraging people to unpack and actually think about how systemic oppressions operate not only in the world, but within our own lives and within our organization, and to kind of dig deep and make the commitment to each other to interrupt systemic oppressions wherever we see them within the organization or outside the organization. So that's it's a little bit about trying to help conflict stop before it starts. On also in interacting with folks, in seeing how, the thing about community radio, I always figure any organization that has volunteers is going to have people who are passionate about something, right? People don't just give their time to an organization because, maybe they're kind of bored, they don't really care about it. That's not what motivates people. People are passionate about something they're volunteering for. And with radio, you have that passion plus people that are drawn to a microphone, right? Passion plus a need to express. And so there's often the big personality people who are also a little offbeat because they're attracted to community media. They want to make sure that they're not necessarily a part of the mainstream. They don't want to be a part of the mainstream. That's why we are in this together in community media, trying to amplify messages. And so just looking at how we communicate with each other. Are we communicating in healthy ways? Are we demanding things, or are we working cooperatively? That kind of thing, setting tones and tone checking is super important. So that's a little bit about how we've been dealing with conflict. I would love to get into more details, but again, more interactive. And over to you, Liz. What do you do with HR?
Well, in architecture in general, the tides have been changing for the past 20 years. Architecture before had a very high barrier access. Up until almost 20 years ago, most architecture schools were just white men. Mm-hmm. That's it. There is still a huge gap in gender in architecture, and an even a wider gap in minorities. And that level of understanding and knowing where people come from also adds to conflict in the workplace, as there's generations, different work styles, different expectations of the work-life balance. There's also a big trend that has changed from the cult of personality of the architects, the Mies van der Rohes, the Louis Kahns, the Zahas. I met her, she does scream and yell and will throw things at you. And that was acceptable for the longest time. We were taught this in school. Our professors would go through and criticize us during our crits, take our models and throw them down. And so that continued into studio. Mm-hmm. And only up until probably 20, 30 years ago, those tides are changing with different individuals coming in, different levels of education, different backgrounds, different access. And through those conversations, it's not do as I say anymore. It's actually a team. Those diverse minds, those diverse ways of thinking, schooling about art and architecture, process, the way that we live in the world and our impact on the world have all changed. And so it really is now a truly collaborative team experience. But with that comes a lot of conflict on a day-to-day basis. And we try to bring down sometimes those individuals who came from that older mindset and still want to say, do as I say this way, and it's my way or the highway. You will work here and work long hours. But people work there for the projects and for the people. And that's the most important thing. So on a day-to-day basis, we're trying to make sure that people have respectful conversations. They know their role. We've figured out is the biggest thing in the world. People need to know where they fit into a team. And they need to be able to have the tools to give feedback to their team members. And they need to have the capability of listening to their team members to hear their own feedback. And those are sort of the day-to-day pinch points it's a dance every single day with individuals. And I see the biggest conflicts happening, on the individual level when people don't have the right tools that are needed to complete their job, or the expectations were never told to them to how to meet that. And then on the team level, working with individuals to make sure that people are heard and their own actions aren't affecting a larger group, sort of that unfortunately the rotten apple, and how to deal with those situations, and how to stop the spreading of that negativity. So that's constantly what my role and our organization is, always just trying to be thoughtful and work with individuals to solve these smaller conflicts that they don't end up being huge later on, and also people are blindsided down the road. So it's sort of this small process of starting with the individual and the team and making sure that there's like constant feedback all the time, because the real conflict and the really hard, difficult conversations happen when there was no feedback before, and things have built and built and built and built, and it's like a pressure cooker, and unfortunately a lot of times there's no coming back from that. So that's sort of how I just view conflict resolution, is getting it out there and just diving in.
Absolutely. What you just said about the going from a place of no feedback for quite some time to all of a sudden, look, we're expecting this, right? I've always called that going from 0 to 60.
Yeah.
And we have had staff in our past that have been big fans of that, mostly because they were just petrified of conflict. So if something wasn't about to burn down the building, it's fine, we can, it'll be okay. I'm really busy. It's going to be okay. Until, something happens where it's obviously not going to be okay. This person is now flaming out, swearing at, 3 other people, and and suddenly something has to be done. That same person in our illustrious past would have gone from never having spoken 3 words to this person in any kind of feedback, genuine feedback way, to, that's it, you're out of here. That behavior, you're gone. This would create some backlash. This would, why? You didn't even warn me. So again, we have to provide that feedback. That is so essential. And to help people to give people some tools by which they can grow themselves, and the organization can also grow. I find that there are basically 3 categories for conflict that I run into quite often. One is the disagreement, right? This could happen pretty easily when you have people with conflicting worldviews, different political beliefs, something like that, or the ever popular, I think this room, when we're going to choose a new color, this should be green. No, it needs to be beige. No, it needs to be, these disagreements. These can be real big flashpoints, and they need to be dealt with skillfully. But again, it's best to just sort of acknowledge, oh, right, we're not seeing things the same, and that's okay. We are a diverse organization. We need to be a diverse organization. So how can we just actually have a facilitated conversation and find out maybe there's a 3rd option, maybe there's a 5th option? Can we just come to agreement or agree to disagree and move on? Then there is oppressive behavior. Somebody who may not be aware that they're profiling other members of the organization. This is really damaging. And if you want your organization to be inclusive and to actually be of service to everyone, that has to be addressed. That has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed well. You have to set a standard that just says this is not acceptable. This will actually diminish the organization faster than anything else, faster than any outside threat. Because if you are really truly serving the community, this is such a disservice. It is, in fact, excluding participation from others. And then there's misunderstandings and miscues based on different communication styles. When we're looking at intergenerational communication, when we're looking at what was okay and how we connected 20 years ago to how we do that now, it's a very different world. And so when we have 70-year-old volunteers who may not be used to hearing lingo today and the music kids listen to today and this sort of stuff, again, this is misunderstandings. And again, it can feel like a whole lot of insider-outsider sort of stuff. And again, it has to be addressed skillfully with respect to all parties, because there is no right and wrong in those situations. It's just, wow, when you say hello in your style, this person feels like you're dissing them. When you say hello in your style, this person feels like they're being schooled. So how can we bridge these gaps? And I find that to be really exciting work, actually.
Yeah. I think when you're having these kind of conversations, you get into a rhythm for yourself. Mine is usually I sit and listen to both parties first. I don't interject. I make sure that they have time to get everything out. Then I usually ask some questions, trying to tease out more information. And I think the biggest thing is making sure that each party feels heard. And also there's a portion that I've learned, there's two parts where I've learned to repeat. And first is repeating both of the conflicts, so individuals know that you heard them. And that's the part of the facilitator that you're doing. If it's between two people, there's this dance. And making sure that they're both heard. And then the biggest part, I think, is the hardest part, is the fact that when you give your opinion about this situation, you have to be credible. So you have to have built a trust with these individuals. You have to know them. You have to make sure that you understand their wants, you understand where they want to go with their career, and it takes a lot of time to build that trust, to be able to assess the situation in a meaningful way. So you have to be your most authentic self, you have to be honest, and it's really hard sometimes. And sometimes you also have to hold your tongue. You have to you have to hold your tongue. You can maybe not be your completely authentic self, but you have to...
Authentic enough.
Authentic enough for work, because it is work.
Right.
And then, there's that compromise. There's either the compromise piece or the collaboration piece to fix. And the hardest part, and it's the saddest part, is when there's the ultimatum. And no one wants to get there. And I have been in situations where you try the collaboration, you try the compromise, the work plans, and at the end of the day, there's still a disconnect. And the disconnect is typically one individual can't see how their behavior affects the group or others or the business. And that's the sad part. And everyone knows where that typically leads. But the part that is exciting is when two people actually, or a team, is able to work together for the solution. And then we sit and follow up and make sure that they're following these plans over and over again, and hopefully fostering better relationships. But those points that are so devastating to people are the bias, those implicit biases, and they come in, especially in a large organization and with a variety of individuals from different backgrounds. It's really, really damaging, and I've seen people who, either because of their nationality and their language skills end up almost being dismissed, and what that does to their career, what that does to their self-esteem later, even if they end up having a better opportunity down the line somewhere, what that does to them, they carry it with them. And you hope that no one in your organization has to deal with that. And so those are sort of the sad moments. And you hope through trainings, we've been doing trainings with our staff on implicit bias, leadership trainings, knowing and calling out that kind of bad behavior, because it's almost what you have to do. It really has helped. And I just think that one thing right there is the most damaging to staff.
And calling out that bad behavior, again, it's hard. When I'm about to do it, I feel, that tightness, and I have to remind myself to ground and breathe and realize that we are in relationship. This person and myself are in relationship, and now I have to actually tell them something they don't actually want to see in themselves. So how do I do that, right? Without suddenly breaking this relationship, without making that person feel like they're no longer welcomed here. How do I do that? So for me, being grounded first and approaching that person with love and respect and saying, hey, friend, I just need to tell you, you mentioned to me that there is a person in the music library that you did. This is a pretty typical example of this, by the way. You remember how you told me to go check and see who the person was in the music library because you didn't know them, and how you weren't sure if they were supposed to be here. I went and I checked with them, and they've been volunteering for several months now, and they're actually working on a podcast on a pretty regular basis. Maybe you don't know each other. I should probably introduce you to each other. But before I do that, could you tell me why you thought maybe they didn't belong? Because I have to tell you, this is a really typical example. And I have had a number of volunteers tell me that they weren't sure if that person should be in the music library. Mostly those volunteers are white, but not exclusively. And I can absolutely tell you that the person in the music library has never been white.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so as soon as I say, what made you think that was the person you needed to draw to my attention? There's this like, well, I don't know, I didn't know them. Do you know everyone else that passes you who goes into the music library? Well, there's just something, really. Like what? Until we, are able to unpack a little bit. And I try to do it with love, and I try to maybe even bring in a little humor. And depending on the relationship I have with this person, to me, there's just, if I'm doing something that is damaging to somebody else, I sure as heck want somebody to tell me. Because I don't want to be like that. And I know we all have biases we have not addressed, that we have maybe somewhere, something that's just happened and it triggered, I don't even know what. And if I'm ever doing that, I sure as heck want somebody to point it out. And so if I'm closer to this person, I might say, when you have spinach in your teeth, your best friend's going to tell you, but most of the world won't. And then you're going to get home and be like, man, when did that get there? You get spinach in your teeth, And as a friend, I just want you to know it's not a good look, And so we can just sort of work through that really tough moment together and hopefully do it with enough compassion that they will feel like, yeah, they're still welcome to be there. I don't now judge them and think that they're a jerkwad. I don't know if I'm supposed to swear on cable. I don't know.
We'll keep it clean.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to use my mic words. And then I will take the time to introduce them to the other volunteer who hopefully has not necessarily gotten, who hopefully has not been subjected to that more directly by that person. And then they can form a relationship as community members together. So that's one example of trying to deal with what could be really damaging implicit bias.
I'm lucky I have a secure building, so.
Yeah, so do we, ish. But again, with so many volunteers coming and going, they don't always know each other.
Yeah.
And I'm often present when people who have been producing programs at the station for years meet for the first time, because that person's only there ever on a Monday or a Tuesday. They got to work this in with the rest of their life schedule. Well, this person's only ever coming in on a Sunday afternoon. Oh, I've been listening to your show for years. It's cool. So still, there's, even if we have a secure building, and of course only volunteers are wandering around, behind the front desk, behind the lobby, there's still a great opportunity that people don't know each other and may not trust that whoever was opening the front door didn't just let in God knows it. So, should we?
I really liked what you said about the spinach in your teeth. That is something that I think that you're not doing anybody any favors by not telling them.
Yeah.
And there's the different ways you can go about telling them, deciding whether it's in public or in private. So your comfortability, their comfortability, and the outcome later. But yeah, I really like, you're not doing anybody any favors by not telling them.
So true.
Yeah.
And we try whenever possible to do this in private. And it goes, again, with our need to not humiliate any person in our community, even if they're behaving in a way that is damaging. We still don't want to humiliate them. That tends not to help people change their perspectives, right? That said, if somebody has just done something egregious in public, then to address that publicly is called for, because you want the rest of the folks there to know that's not acceptable. And you also want the person who may be damaged to understand, no, this is not acceptable. We will not be having this. Please, we want to support you. What do you need in this moment? How can we make this relationship whole? How can we support you in this moment that has been anti-community, if you will? But that is, again, it's much trickier to do that in public.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we open up to questions?
Yeah.
Okay, here and then back.
You mentioned earlier having everybody going through a little training thing. Do you find recently with things that are coming out in the media that aren't new, they're just coming out in the media,
Right.
Do you find that your training is changing, or how often do you update that? Or
Yeah, this is where we are I think we are entering our third year. And is that true? I think maybe second year, sorry. And we have definitely changed it. The first year was sort of written in a much more traditional equity sort of, what is equity? How can we all get along? Understanding biases. Here's what systemic oppression looks like. This is racism. Here's how we address these things. That was our first year. And then through feedback from people who had taken it and growing as our awareness grows, as new people come and give input into, well, that was interesting, but it would be more effective if. And so now, at first we thought it was sort of a one and done. Now we're actually looking at it as every year you have to take this again, because we're all going to learn something within that year and shift the training accordingly. And I think that, we're in the, I want to say that we're in the social justice movement, right? And we know that there is no such thing as, well, we've achieved. Check. We're always going to be growing with that. Hopefully, we're always going to be growing with that. So we need to understand that as our awareness increases, so our trainings will change and grow. We have, maybe I'll leave it there. As our awareness grows, then we need to change things. We have in our mission a clause about decolonizing mass consciousness with humility and integrity bringing long-lasting impacts to our communities. What does that mean? Yes, I was actually a part of writing that line, but what does it mean? It sounds great, and it's exactly where we want to be. But what I mean by that, and what the other staff and board members meant by that when we wrote it together, is here. But this person that comes in and does a music show on a Saturday afternoon, decolonizing what? We're gonna help. And so when we start having these conversations about, well, you know, the song, you had the song, it was awfully stereotyping. It offered up really tired and racist stereotypes of Native American community. This happened on a swing country show, for example. That's something that is unfortunate. Let's talk about what this means vis-a-vis our vision of decolonizing mass consciousness. What does decolonizing mean to you? What does it mean to be colonized? And having these discussions with somebody who's never had them before is mind-blowing. And fascinating and kind of wonderful and kind of hard. Takes some time, but it's so worth it. And again, if we can do it from a place of let's learn about this together instead of you are so bad right now. Like, I am writing you up and you got 2 more strikes, man. You know, it's like that's not a good way to engage other community members. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that anyone can turn on the radio at any time and not feel denigrated and humiliated by the content that's being played. So, yeah.
Yeah, I honor that because we recently had to do that in our little community radio station in Eugene. But my question is for a wider view. We do a lot of work, community work in our radio station, you know, social, what you would call social justice. And we just had a whole big conference on decolonizing ourselves. But anyway, we go out and work with the large homeless community that in Eugene. We do programming with them, and we recently had many conflicts with the local police who don't have the same point of view as you, and they have what you call authority. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we come into, I guess it's hard for us to say open conflict, but open conflict because we believe as community media that we have the duty and the right to be in oppressive situations that a lot of the homeless are experiencing in Eugene. So what's your advice when you come into these oppressive situations?
So when you're coming into an oppressive situation, like putting yourself in, say, if there's I'm not sure I'm understanding, so I'm going to try to reflect and see if I get what you're asking. Are you asking if there's a large homeless population in this one area, and as community broadcasters, you want to go be in that area, experience what they are experiencing, maybe your volunteers are a part of that community, and witnessing how they're treated by the police, by authority figures, and being there as both a witness and a message amplifier for that community who is facing that oppression?
That's one.
Okay.
The other is there are almost daily conflicts.
Yeah.
There's profiling, there's just general bad treatment, and we will have people who volunteer from that community as well as other communities to go out and record it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes those people are told to leave the situation.
Right.
That's the least. A lot of times they have their media confiscated.
Yeah.
They're physically assaulted for being there.
I gotcha. So that's more of an issue around media access and the police. And there are real specific laws around how close you can be, what you can do. And I would suggest that you check with legal advice. We have an organization here, Portland Cop Watch. That's what they do. They watch the police. They will monitor hot sort of situations with the intention of being a witness. National Lawyers Guild does this. And there are real specific things. Now, when your rights as a journalist are crossed because that cop may know the law and may ignore it because they don't want you to film them using profanity and profiling a person who is on the street. That doesn't mean you don't have the right to do it. But arguing with that cop in that moment is not going to do you any good, right? So it's the legal, you need legal training. You need, and I'm going to guess that Eugene has a Cop Watch-like training. Doesn't? We need to talk. Yeah, okay. I was going to say, I know that they used to. If they don't anymore, we probably should talk about how to find that resource, because that's a little bit beyond this particular panel for sure, but it is an absolute community need and a right of journalists to witness and be present for those situations, for sure. Questions?
Do you do your own training? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Do you do your own training, so you have somebody come in to do them?
A little from column A and a little from column B. We have really talented people who do this kind of work within our community. We do pay them because we feel like it's important emotional labor work that is being done. But we also have now brought in another media activist who's actually presenting in the next session, who has revamped the training and made it much more, I think, relevant, and is sort of bringing it forward. And they're a part of our community. They hadn't necessarily worked with us closely before this, but they are, I would not exactly say they are external to the organization anymore. Yeah.
This isn't don't quite know how to form this question yet, so it's gonna. But basically, I see there's sometimes people censor themselves a lot. Like they get to this place where you see with teams like, I don't want to say anything wrong, so I'm not going to say anything at all, right? And there's like less laughter, there's like, and so what do you do about that when you can kind of sense that happening when people are, there's a lot of self-censorship?
Yeah, that happens. I see it happening a lot in different team dynamics because at some point someone's been shut down. And so you almost have to inject someone, and sometimes leaders of the group can be too busy to see that. Happens a lot. Their awareness of those situations that someone is being quiet, it just gets glossed over because they're looking at the to-do list. And so they might miss it, and it comes out sometimes later through a frustration of that individual who hasn't spoken up down the line, or someone else notices it and sometimes comes to me or someone else, but it kind of, to me, it gets to me eventually. But in that situation, I typically go and have coffee with the person, just check in with them in general, how they're doing and how they're feeling about the project, what they're excited about, what they're not excited about, and hope to pull some of that stuff out with them and encourage them to talk and to express their opinions about the project. And then usually, and the most effective way is to work with one or two people on that team who that individual feels safe with, and sometimes it is the manager, sometimes it's not, but it typically is someone who is either a peer or a little bit above them. And during team meetings, there's this moment of the delta, the change at the very end when you are recapping the meeting and saying, I really want to hear your opinion. What was your opinion about this thing? And so you almost need to force this conversation and then engage the person back again, because in a way, something happened that cut off their communication, and you have to invite them back in, and you have to build the trust again with them as a team that they won't be shut down again. And so there is almost this theater behind the scene of working with someone, a manager or a peer who can lean in and say, hey, I think you had a really good idea about this while we were sitting at our desks. You know, you should voice it to the rest of us and let us know. But you almost create a safety net for that person for a brief period of time. And then hopefully they will be able to feel safe to talk and to express their opinions and to contribute to the team. It's hard, but it happens, I think, a lot with individuals, and there's a point that they got shut down, and we're helping them recover from that.
I think also I totally love that. I would totally back that. And I think that in addition to that, there's, I think sometimes people start becoming afraid of, and I've heard this since we've been really looking at strengthening our internal community and bringing everyone up to sort of an awareness of the intersectionalities and systemic oppressions that most of the people involved in the station face. And that is, oh, well, you know, everyone's so PC now. Everyone's so PC. I don't even know if I should say anything at all ever. Politically correct. That is probably the phrase that drives me just absolutely, I'm so frustrated with it. Because to me, the idea of, oh, well, that's so politically correct is actually a really good way of shutting down any kind of social justice work, right? And it's not, to me, about being politically correct. It's about being respectful and inviting to all communities, right? And so if somebody is feeling like pretty squidgy, like, wow, they bid you watch their P's and Q's, I kind of hear this in sort of the national public discourse around the Me Too movement. Well, now guys won't even know how to flirt.
Yeah.
Everyone, there'll be no more fun at all. Like what? You know, like what is that? That is not. And so along those same lines, when I start to sense that or actually hear that from somebody, and you know, our volunteers are pretty forthright. It's so PC. I can't get behind this decolonizing stuff. That's so PC. What does that mean? What does it mean to be PC? Does it mean that you can't express yourself without being sexist, racist, anti-queer, Muslim? What does that mean? Because if in fact that's true for you, then probably you could go play someplace else. But if that's not true for you, then what are you worried about, really? What? You're afraid you might have to actually talk to somebody through some issue that may be a misunderstanding? That's frightening to some people, especially if they haven't been confronted on their internal biases before. But it's a fear that they kind of need to face, and we try to encourage them to face it. And if they can't face it, then they need to go places and do other things.
Mm-hmm. Did that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think that works when there's things that are obvious, but I think sometimes even say like, oh, do I use the word black or do I say African American? Yeah. Right? And it's like, oh, but I don't know which word. I don't want to know. I don't want to look like I don't know, so I'm going to like talk around it.
That's where there's the ask.
And so that's where it's, and I can see that with people struggling, like, well, what's the latest word now?
Yeah.
I don't want to look like I don't know.
Right.
And so that's, I mean, which is, there's the, I don't want to appear ignorant.
Or insensitive.
Yeah.
Or insensitive, right. Because I don't know.
What's the latest pronoun for it?
Yeah.
You ask.
Yeah, you ask.
you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that is and that is exactly it. And we really try to encourage relationship building, because when we actually don't see each other as strangers, when we're like, hey, I see you every week, we're like, what do you like to, we can talk about lunch, we can talk about, music we like, we can talk about this and that, and then we can get into some deeper stuff. And what we find is that there is no one correct word for any community. I have always preferred queer to describe myself. And I can tell you that 30 years ago when I was in college, that was way ahead of the curve. And I got a lot of pushback on that, especially by college administration who were like, that's disrespectful. You've just said hate speech. You cannot be in student leadership and engage in hate speech. I'm like, I'm talking about my own community. Right?
About me.
So it's that relationship that can often give permission for people to actually explore and ask. And certainly, again, each community gets to self-define, and members of that community are not monolithic. And I still have, I keep hitting my microphone, you'd think I'd know better. But there are still, people within the LGBTQ community that really hate the word queer. And that's okay. If somebody says I'm really uncomfortable with that, I will try to remember that information and I will try to address them by whatever they would like to be addressed. And I would like for them to still address me as queer, which is nicely all-encompassing. Thank you very much. It's like, and it's about relationship building. There's no shortcut. And I think giving people permission to tell somebody, oh, I really don't like that, when I don't like that label, that doesn't feel right to me, I always prefer this. We're trying to normalize pronoun, stating our pronouns in meetings as we introduce ourselves, and we're trying to make that now just part of the background so that we can, again, be more welcoming and inviting to all. And I tell you, there's nothing like having a fresh group of people interested in volunteering who may not have ever been exposed to this before, and we're going around the room and saying, what's your name and what pronoun do you use? And undoubtedly there's a cis guy sitting there going, what do you mean? Well, do you refer to yourself as he, she, they? What? I'm a guy, and it's just like that whole, yeah, okay, so would that be he? Cool, and on to the next person, and just normalize it, and we're moving on through this, and cool, we're all doing this together. Try to make it not threatening, but it's real and it's important. And so it's a lot about encouraging curiosity and feedback to each other, but trying to do that in a way that is not putting the burden on marginalized communities to educate more privileged communities about their existence.
Yeah. And I think for individuals, like their preference, I think it's also a good moment to actually connect with them and know where they come from and the why. Like, why the word queer?
Yeah.
Why for you? And to actually have that discussion to understand, rather than it's just a word.
Right.
It's a word to describe you, but what it actually means to you.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a way of actually building those bridges and getting to know each other.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's black, and he refers to himself as black because he was born in Jamaica and raised in Toronto. He doesn't consider himself African American. He
Right, there's nothing African American about that.
him. Yeah.
I don't want to be called African American, but he's usually called that. So it's just one of those things that it took me a while to get to know him. To say,
So you know about his culture, where he comes from.
Yeah.
It's very different. His path is very different.
Right. And there's a lot more of that now in this country. I mean, there are people from everywhere. So just it's really hard to know. But asking, especially like you're saying, build a relationship first, and you don't have to label everybody. Even though we do.
Shifting gears a little bit. You might want to help me with this one, Monica. I think you know who I'm about to ask about. We have a client who she's had a lot of abuse in her life and a lot of tough, pardon my speech, shit happen to her. And she goes from really sweet to all of a sudden, I'm censoring what I want to say about her in 0 to 60 seconds, and there's no calming her down. Have you had any experience with dealing with this type of person? And what have you done?
Yeah.
You first.
Have a lot of bad luck, a lot of negative experiences.
Yeah.
And falls apart very easily, and then it's like,
Yeah.
it's very hard to calm her down. Yeah.
If it's the moment and that person is that explosion, the best thing to do is hopefully try to move them out of the. You're trying to move the bomb, You move the bomb out of the situation as best you can. Bring them into another room. If it is in a room already, close the door. Don't match the explosion. Just don't match the explosion. And sometimes you almost have to wait until it's done and then really talk about the why. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it takes sometimes months, years even. A lot of times if that person I've seen, if that has that explosion, that moment that you talk about it though, they shut down. That's probably the other half, the shutting down. And there's the conversation about giving them tools to help them not get to that level. I had an experience with an employee who everything would seem fine, this almost mask of happiness all the time, and then would explode like that in tense situations because she felt like that the team was failing at things and the expectations were not where she was at. And I tried to coach her with a group of individuals that it's not failing. If something falls, just pick it up. Just pick it up. It's okay. Just keep moving. It didn't fail. Your project manager didn't think anything bad happened, but the tool that got her, whatever got her from 0 to 60, where can we inject points that are tools for her so she won't get there?
I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the hard things about this situation is it's a volunteer.
It's a volunteer. Yeah.
It's staff members dealing with this volunteer. And,
Yeah,
and she will calm down later, but then send a big long rambling letter.
That's sometimes policies that you have with your organization about codes of conduct, working with your staff, because on the HR side, yes, these are volunteers, but you also have to worry about your staff. And if your staff is facing harassment from a volunteer and you're allowing that, you become culpable in that. So trying to get in front of your staff so they are not exposed to that person is probably something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also, it's important to recognize that this is trauma-informed response, right? And so this person, you're describing really somebody who is living with PTSD. And so and really so many of us have that diagnosis, right? And so what you're doing, how can you support her? But in those flameouts, exactly what Liz is saying, how can you sort of mitigate the fallout, right? And then ask her how she can be supportive. Get to know what are her triggers. Does she know what her triggers are? Does she have support in her life? Does she actually have somebody in a therapeutic world that she can talk to? If she doesn't, how invested are you? Because I think community is community, we're all in, right? So can you help to find her resources that she might be able to get a better handle on things that are really, really harmful to her, right? Can there be community response? Can she inform you what is going to trigger, and can you do something about lessening those triggers? Not everyone with PTSD is going to know everything that's going to trigger them all the time. You never know. You can be hit out of the blue with something. But how can you help her stay more in control of her response? How can she be supported?
And because she's a volunteer, you can actually have those conversations with her about her psychology because she's not an employee.
So I can have it or I can't?
No, you can. You can. So you can actually talk about services and things like that, where if it was your employee, you can't. So unless they have actually told you about a disability or a condition, you can't bring that up. So in some ways, it's easier to give a person resources.
Our radio station is all volunteer, which has its own special problems. One of the issues that I have tried to deal with is the being responsible. When someone says, oh yeah, I'll do something, and then doesn't do it, or it doesn't get done, and then, you know, they blame someone else, oh, I couldn't do it because blah, blah, blah. And so, I mean, you know, I want to say, okay, you're going to do this or else. But then, or else what?
That is your question.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's like, okay, you can't play with us anymore, you know, and then there goes a third of our volunteers. We're very, very small.
Yeah.
So again, how do you foster the sense of responsibility?
Wow. I would start with a conversation of, why do you want to be here? Is this valuable to you? This is the work that needs to be done, and I thank you ever so much for doing it. You know, I noticed that this didn't get actually completed. What was the hang up? Oh, it was this other person didn't do the thing? Okay, cool. Check in with the other person. That might be true.
It's usually me.
Well, so again, were there resource issues? Was it a time issue? Was there a deadline that they just couldn't do because life happened and they were poorly planning? You know, I mean, there are many factors. And volunteers, the thing I have to really, anyone working with volunteers, the thing you have to remember is volunteers, yes, passionate, but also have full lives going on outside the organization. This is not the place that they, you know, they need to support themselves. They may have childcare issues. They may have health issues. They may have family issues. They may have partners with health issues. There's a whole life going on there. And so I guess trying to address, you know, what's going on and having check-ins before deadlines. Hey, how's that project coming? Is it going to happen by then? Oh, you need a little more time on that? Cool. Well, we really need it done by, you know, Thursday because Friday's the open house. And, you know, we can't stop time. Let me know if you need help. How can I support you more? And because your resources are also finite, you know, I'm trying to figure out a you know, group solution. You know, if you don't personally have the time to invest in that project, what other volunteer can you pair up? Does that person have good relationships with somebody who can support them and have a buddy system? So if somebody's starting to flounder and that isn't going to get done, is there somebody else that is right there to pass the baton to without involving you?
I just kind of wanted to piggyback on that and say kind of the same situation, but in a staff scenario where it's all staff and you're all on the same level, and something's, you know, the ball's getting dropped or something isn't going well, and you don't want to go to your boss every 5 seconds with some little thing. How do you deal with those situations as an equal on staff?
Having a tough conversation with someone. I would actually tell people first, if they can't, like go on teams in that situation, to hopefully work it out on the individual level first, and bring it up in that kinder way, and talk about, hey, I noticed a difficulty that you couldn't get this done on time. You know, can we talk about why? Can I help you with something to get you to the place where we can get this project done? Because the lowest common denominator is, especially on a team, is you want to do a good job. And so start from there and find out what is the pinch point for that person, what is going on, because we are full people, and sometimes our outside world comes into our work environment. So is it they don't have the skill to complete the task? Do they not have the resource to complete it? Are they missing pieces of information? So finding out the reason why. And if it's just because they don't care and they don't want to do it, then that's a totally different conversation. But most people want to do a good job, and most people want to be part of a team. So that probably isn't the case.
Other questions? I think we have about 9 minutes left.
Yeah, I have a question for Liz. It's actually a two-part. Do you, well, maybe I'll just ask it this way, not necessarily a two-part, but some employees have like a yearly review on their job and stuff.
Yep.
Do you find that maybe some greater percentage of your your term maybe coming around those times, or do you have like a different approach to that kind of situation, like somebody's coming to you at a time or after a time of a yearly review or something like that?
So across the board at any organization that I've ever worked with, the yearly review, usually what happens is the point where they're not happy with review is the money. The point where they're not happy is after and the money. So we have decoupled our review from compensation, so that the review, of course, does inform compensation, but they're not at the same moment. Because for years and years, folks would have a glowing review or have a bad review, and then the money would come up, good or bad, and it colored the performance piece. And anything for improvement or looking forward, it just stopped when it came down time for money, title, level adjustment. It just ended any kind of conversation, and people forgot what was told to them for feedback for improvement, or even what to keep going, keep doing that. And then it became all about the money and level. So we decoupled that. And then we have been trying to do check-ins more frequently with individuals of feedback, and getting managers used to actual critical feedback happen in the moment. And then the review is actually a look forward. So what will the person be doing? What are their goals and how we can get you there? And then trends that are seen based on performance that hinder you getting there are talked about and worked through in the review. So many times the review and the feedback is actually positive and good and reflective, and we take a lot of care in who's doing reviews. We are lucky that we are so large, and we have 20 different senior officials doing reviews. So if someone in some ways doesn't speak the same language as another person, they have another avenue to go to get their review and get the information they need in a thoughtful way. But people come to me all throughout the year, and even terms happen. Terminations usually don't ever happen during the review time, if that was part of one of your questions too. Okay.
I just wondered what I was looking for or trying to ask was, do you like shift into like a higher gear at that point in time? But if you're doing that and encouraging that more rather than just like an annual type of thing, and it's ongoing throughout.
Very briefly, so on the other side of that, I feel like ZGF does a really good job with giving feedback throughout the year. We always have problems, and there are pinch points still that we're coaching individuals, but in a whole, we're getting there. We're always for improvement. I did some consulting for a company a few years ago, and the way that they were doing reviews, that's actually when I would talk to everybody. And it was because their reviews were full of language that were, some of it was bias language. It wasn't about a person's actual abilities, and it actually didn't state things. It stated things like about them or ideas about them. Like, I have this idea about you. One of them was a black man who their manager described them as Stanley Kowalski from Streetcar. And they had two different ideas of what that was. One person thought it was this boisterous, just grandiose Marlon Brando persona, and the person getting that feedback was like, that person's a rapist. Right. And so those are types of things that you don't do. You don't do in reviews. You don't compare people to fictional characters. You don't give these ideas about people. You actually talk about what they can and can't do.
Right.
So don't do that. Don't do that.
Wow, it's almost like a creative writing exercise
Yeah,
more than a performance review, right?
Yeah, bullet points.
We'll have-
Bullet points.
Reviews by analogy.
Yeah. Yeah,
The
reviews by
parable of-
analogy are not good. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. Any last question? Okay.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Annie, and thank you, Liz. Really.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's great. Thank you very much for being a very engaged, participating attendees. Thanks.